Hello, Flimps and Flim Flamps. I'm Solid Steak, and we're just gonna get right into it this time. On the last complaining video, I talked quite a bit about controllers, and this is one that I forgot to include, and I'm almost kind of glad I did because it's a strange controller, and there's a lot to talk about, and it kind of almost could use a video in itself. So we're gonna do that. It's no secret, a lot of people, particularly people who didn't grow up with the console, really don't like this controller at all. And I don't really blame them. Has its issues. Just to clarify, I like the controller, but I do feel kind of similar with how I feel about the GameCube controllers, that I think the ergonomics are good. I think the buttons feel nice, but just the atypical layout of it makes it really not ideal for games that weren't designed specifically around it. I do think that the GameCube controller is a vastly superior controller, but this one's fine. It's okay. But yeah, the thing that's gonna strike you immediately is its odd design. Like we've gone over before, this is the DualShock 2, which was very similar to the DualShock 1, which was the controller that sort of standardized or set the template for what future controllers would try to emulate. It's got your face buttons, your four shoulders, your two analog sticks, and your D-pad over here. Anybody who's played a video game in the last decade recognizes this layout. This is very much not that. In the 90s, they were still trying to work out how game controllers should be designed with 3D games in mind. Now, my theory for how it was is that they were originally designing the controller like this, sort of an upgrade to the SNES controller, and then they realized, they wanted an analog stick on it, and they slapped a third handle on it. But the more likely theory is that it was designed where you could hold the controller like this for 2D games, that if you wanted to use the D-pad, and then hold the controller like this for 3D games where you'd want to use the analog stick. That way your means of movement is always in an easy to access primary position, as opposed to being in, say, like a secondary position like the GameCube, or to a lesser extent the PS2 controller. And while that seems stupid now, obviously you're going to want easy access to all your functions, because that just gives you the most possible control options at any given time. Controllers are really a product of their time. Really, what might seem obvious now didn't seem obvious back then. Like, they didn't know how many games were going to be coming out that were going to be 2D still. They didn't know if 3D was going to pan out. They designed a controller that they feel could be used for both. And yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I will say, I think the handles on the controller, they are pretty ergonomic. It's comfortable either way you hold it, but it does have some glaring issues. Namely, you can't use all the buttons on the same time. Like, this half of the controller almost never gets used. It's just dead weight. you're like never going to be able to hit this one without twisting either twisting the controller to hit with your right hand or completely moving your left hand, taking your hand off the analog stick. And that's another issue a lot of people have, is they don't particularly like the analog stick. They don't like the rough plastic, which I understand. And a lot of people complain that it gets loose over time. And I don't know how vigorously you have to be using the analog stick for that to happen, but this controller is probably almost 20 years old, and it's still fine. So, I don't know what the fuck these guys are doing to their analog sticks, but I've never found that to be an issue. Yeah, it also has an expansion port on the back, which, memory cards and the rumble pack can go into, which would go on to inspire the Dreamcast controller with their VMUs and stuff, and then that concept would later be used on the original Xbox controller. But yeah, that's the N64 controller. It's a strange product of its time. I like it, even though it has some shortcomings, but I also grew up on the N64, so I kind of have a bias. Yeah, though. That's that thing. Better than this piece of shit.